topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. It's Tuesday morning, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. So for those of you who have got our books, I want to say thank you, because with your help, we are able to help entrepreneurs globally across the whole world. And we do that using kiva.org. And it's just amazing how people come together and help entrepreneurs. And if you have not got your copy, do remember to get your copy of either Expert to Influencer, which will help you become the influencer you want to be, create the impact you desire. Or you can get the Entrepreneur's Garden, which will help you set up your business or scale your business, or any one of our other books. We've got several books that you can choose from. And also, I'm going to invite you and encourage you to give that 1 hour of your time every month with no strings attached to help someone, whether it's your loved one, whether it's your neighbor or a stranger. So let's bring our guest on. Welcome, Melissa.
Hey, it's great to be here.
It's awesome to have you. So Melissa, we usually begin during your childhood. So do you have a moment that you remember even today, or any of your memories from childhood that stands out for you?
Well, let's see. I had an interesting childhood. I skipped 2 grades, so I was always younger than the other kids. So a lot of my memories are kind of being this like sort of funny, awkward kid who is a lot younger than the other kids in the class.
Yeah, and I'm sure that must have been tough. And how did you manage that?
Well, I mean, kids are adaptable, right? That's you don't really know any other way. And I think it has its pluses and minuses, right? I think if I hadn't skipped grades, I would have been really bored. So it evens out.
That's true. And I like what you said. I did not know any other way. That's how it was. So let's continue your journey. So as you grew up, what were your interests?
Let's see. Well, I was a big reader as a kid, still am. And, I loved writing from a young age. And just, with being outside, I grew up in North Carolina, really enjoyed the outdoors. My family always went hiking and stuff like that.
Oh, North Carolina is beautiful, because that's where I'm at. I'm a fan of North Carolina.
Yeah, no, it's great. I always say best weather in the United States.
It sure is. We already have spring out there. And of course, along with the blooms, my allergies are blooming too, but that doesn't stop me from going out, go get those allergy pills and continue going out. So definitely agree with you there. So talking about reading, was there any particular book that left a mark?
Let's see. A few different ones, depending on what age. I would say the Edward Eger books, which were about magic, long before Harry Potter, right? Those were the original books about magic. And then when I got older, the Robert Caro books about Lyndon Johnson, his series of biographies of Lyndon Johnson, I thought were fascinating because it really talked about kind of how do things get done in the world, right? How do people accomplish things, for good and for bad? They were fascinating.
Absolutely. And autobiographies can be challenging in the sense that sometimes you kind of think you have this different perception of a person, and when you go and take a look, they're very much like you or the next door neighbor, because everybody goes through those pain points and struggles. So as you continued your journey in your life, like, where did it take you?
Let's see. So we moved from North Carolina up to Westchester County, New York in the middle of high school, graduated from high school, went to college at Harvard. And after that, moved to Manhattan, worked in advertising for a couple of years. And, it was very interesting. I always say advertising is like, it was like learning about the skin of the body. And I wanted to learn more about the heart and lungs. So at that point, I went back to business school. Swore I would do anything but financial services. So of course I ended up in financial services, working for a bank in London for the few years just prior to the financial crisis, which was a truly fascinating experience in terms of being both a cross-cultural experience and a very interesting industry experience as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you didn't want to go back in finance. So what was it that made you go back?
Well, so I'd been in advertising prior, right? So it was actually a huge change, and I think part of what attracted me was the energy of the trading floor, right? That I was selling commodities, first oil and then carbon credits, and I love that energy and markets moving and all of that good stuff. But it's interesting. It wasn't really my calling ultimately. Consulting really ended up being my calling, but I figured that out a little bit by accident when I decided I wanted to come back to the United States. I'd been selling carbon credits, so I got a job at Deloitte as a carbon markets consultant. They thought the United States was going to get a carbon market at that point. And what's interesting is that, the subject matter that I've consulted on, has changed over the years, starting from, at that point, it was really around ESG transformation. And now I work on people transformation. But that practice of consulting really turned out to be the work that energizes me.
Well, that's awesome. So sounds like your career has changed trajectories a few times. And how did you and when did you know that it was people that you wanted to work with?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I kind of had this break point when I left Deloitte when I was pregnant with my daughter about, I guess what was it, 9 years ago at this point. And it was really born out of the insight that I still believed in kind of this intersection very much, and I still very much do, of making the world a better place and, capitalism, right? And making money. I think those two things can go hand in hand. But I realized that the lever of that change really is people. And that if we sort of don't work on the people side of things, nothing else is going to work. And so I made this very deliberate, kind of pivot into people consulting, which, has really proven to be, an incredibly inspiring and interesting place to work.
Well, you're absolutely right on the mark that if organizations, systems, processes, whatever we want to call them, these are all just frameworks, and they're nothing without the people. Because if you think about it, right, when we say people buy from people, people work because of the relationships. Why is it that in a team, like one person has more influence than anybody else? Like, that when that person speaks up, people will listen, people will give them credence, people will follow them. And at the same token, there could be someone who's very bright and yet inadept at maintaining and building those relationships. People will not even listen to her or him. So definitely I completely resonate with your point that it's about people rather than anything else. So given that, in the last few years, a lot of changes have happened and mental health has been impacted. And amongst that, like a lot of things have been impacted with the creation of being a digital nomad and workers working everywhere. So yes, it has opened up a lot of areas where people were almost like praying for, like, oh, I wish I could stay at home. And it's almost like the prayers were answered on a global level and everybody was staying. And yet it has brought its own set of problems. So, like, there's a lot of anxiety monsters going around. So you do talk about slaying work monsters, along with the anxiety monster and a boss baby customer. So tell us a little bit about that and how do you go about it?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. When I started writing my book, which is called Work Here Now, Think Like a Human and Build a Powerhouse Workplace, one of the things I was really conscious of is, we feel these bad things at work, right? We get these like, oh, that's not so good, but we don't always have ways to name them. So I thought, let's have a bit of fun. Let's name a couple of characters. Who's making things worse? So the work anxiety monster, we'll start off with that one. That's the little voice in your head that says that people are lazy and people are slow. And it makes us make bad management decisions. We have to drive everybody faster. We have to get them to work harder. Well, at this point in history, we're all working pretty hard and we're mostly working pretty fast, right? So that energy, that like anxiety monster energy is just unhelpful. If anything, it's making things worse. So and then the work anxiety monsters, we do it to ourselves too. I'm lazy, I'm slow. All of this, like the productivity culture. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. At a prior role, I actually taught a class in productivity, and I look back on that now and I go, oh goodness, no, not the issue. So that's one, the work anxiety monster. Then the boss baby customer is an interesting one because unlike the work anxiety monster comes from a bad place, right? That's just your own anxious feelings and extrapolates up to organizational level, and it's just not good. The boss baby customer actually comes from some really good intentions, right? That over the last, let's say 10 or 20 years, we've said, okay, we are going to do better for our customers, right? Customer centricity. We're going to be amazing for our customers. So, fabulous. But what we've done is we've created in our minds this boss baby customer. So they're a boss because your customer is fully in charge of you, right? They're telling you what to do, and they're a baby because they can't do anything for themselves. They're helpless. And that combination, right, is pretty toxic. And by the way, it's not reflective of real customers, right, who can do things for themselves and do not need to be in charge of every aspect of the companies they, are purchasing products and services from. So, kind of re-engineering around that boss baby customer and saying, okay, well, here's a useful dividing line between what I want my customer experience to be and what I want my employee experience to be. That sensible dividing line is the best. That's where we need to live. But it takes some work to get there, right? You have to shut down those thoughts of, which are a little anxiety monster-ish. If I don't serve the customer in X way, they're going to go do business with someone else.
Well, definitely. You brought up a really good point that if I don't do this X, Y, and Z with customers, they'll go away. So it also again kind of goes back to having those values. Like, what is the 1, 2, 3, or 5 core values that you want to live your life by? And that's also reflected in the organizational culture, not only at the individual level, it doesn't matter whether you're a startup business or an organization, and identifying your ideal client. Because if you are working with your ideal client, they will be appreciative of you. And even having a culture that, like, it's okay. It's okay for us to let go of a customer because if they're not the right customers, they'll walk away unhappy anyway. And now they may end up writing bad reviews or talking bad about you or causing you so many issues that just having that one customer, and this is like I can tell from my own previous days of my previous life when I used to work in Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies, along with being a consultant for so many years, that the energy spent on a bad customer or on a demanding customer is so much that it sucks out so much of you versus you could bring on 2 ideal customers, whereas you're spending that time on one bad customer, which is like the double. So it's again like sitting down and recognizing your core values. And so have you had any experience around that?
Yeah, it's really interesting that in kind of my consulting practice, this is an issue that we end up talking about a lot, about, to what extent are guardrails for your customers, and to your point, even firing bad customers, a legitimate strategy for improving employee experience. And it's interesting because I think 99% of the time it's guardrails. I think it's really setting sensible limits. And I've seen that in my own life, that when I've pushed back with a client where I've said, okay, well, that's fabulous. The team cannot have it for you in that exact time frame. Here's what they can do, et cetera, et cetera. 99% of the time, you've got human beings on the other side, and they'll say, oh, okay. Or, well, here's actually the piece we need early, and you don't have to do the whole thing. And there's a whole conversation to be had that, again, sets that really sensible boundary of customer experience and employee experience. The 1% who are not rational and who continue to push back, right? That, okay, those are the customers or clients you fire. But in general, that can be I think a really positive, constructive conversation, because again, if you think about it, it's better for the customer too, because a lot of times it will get to a place of them articulating what they truly need. And when you get to a place where you're saying, this is what I can truly deliver, and they're saying, this is what I truly need, again, that's a great conversation. That's a productive place for everybody. And when we don't come back and ask questions, we don't sort of push back and set healthy limits, we never get to that conversation, which is actually a good place to be.
Completely agree with you, because when you mentioned about having a healthy conversation, it's so important to set up those expectations right at the beginning of your project. So it's not even sometimes, so I remember this is a story with one of our clients. They were notorious because they had changed some other companies. And then when they came to us, it's a grapevine, like you mentioned, it's people with people. And what we did was we set the expectations and we had them sign those. And this was a completely different from the corporate contracts. And when we had them sign it, they were super hesitant, but they knew that our intention was to have a quality project. And it's almost even kind of bringing and aligning your customers, or even for that matter, team members. What is the common goal? It's not about the egos. It's not about people. It's about what we are going to deliver and whom we are going to deliver. And I found that really, really helps set those guardrails, as you talked about. Now, switching subjects, you also talk about workforce copy machine. What is that?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been interested in for years, is this idea of, we keep talking about the future of work, but we never seem to get there. And we're much more likely in many ways to kind of copy paste the past right back into the future. I mean, look at the dialogue we're having right now around child labor. That issue was supposed to be settled, right? We were not supposed to be using child labor anymore. And yet we're opening up a legal conversation in the United States about, should we be doing it? I don't know. Maybe it's a good idea. Not a good idea, right? Let the past stay buried. So this idea of the copy machine is, what are all the things we do that kind of keep perpetuating the past? And, so some of it is around talent acquisition, that it is easier to do talent acquisition at scale if you literally copy paste, right? So, okay, we're going to open a new job rec. What rec are we going to clone? We're literally going to copy a job for the new job, things like that. Or how we reward leaders. We reward leaders in general for stable, continuous, predictable performance, right? We don't want this stuff, right? But we might want this, right? If it leads to this, right? The growth that so many companies are seeking. But the way that we reward leaders really pushes the continuity button. That it's almost like, if your goal as a restaurant was to never give anyone indigestion or heartburn rather than to cook delicious food, right? We reward leaders for not giving anyone indigestion or heartburn. So the copy machine is kind of the sum of a lot of these factors that just, keep things the same. I mean, another example is human resources is generally not set up in a way that's remotely comparable to the complexity of the organizations around it. And if you study complexity theory, you see that the sort of optimal complexity of something within something else is the complexity should basically match, right? If you're much simpler than your environment or much more complex than your environment, you're doomed to failure. And HR, I mean, it's funded at about a third the level generally of finance or IT. It has about a third as many people per employee as either of those departments, right? So it's super underfunded, and it doesn't match the incredible Byzantine complexity of even, not that gigantic companies. Companies are very complex. And so again, you don't have that mechanism to really push the people side of things into the future. And that's the copy machine that just keeps repeating the past.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say, let's say whether it's a small organization or a mid-size or big organization, they've got all these systems in place where it's always about, especially with you being in the finance side, that every company, especially if it's a public company or even if you're a private company and you're answering to investors, like every quarter, you gotta come up to the expectations or even beat those expectations. Given all of that, how can people turn off that copy machine and create the future workforce that we have been talking about for so many years?
I think some of it is about picking your battles. That, to your point, companies are resource constrained, right? And it's a huge complaint. We would love to do all this great stuff for our people. We don't have the time or the money. Fair play. What you want to do is pick a few key places where you really can make change. And it's interesting. In the book, I've got 90 concrete recommendations, 45 for organizations, 45 for teams. I repeat one twice, and that is do less. If you can actually pick fewer things and do them better, right? That's the key to all kinds of people's success. Because if you look, research shows, for instance, neurologically, we're overloading people at work these days, right? Too many meetings, too many Zoom calls. We are literally frying people's brains. We got to stop doing that. But in terms of making change on the people side as well, and it's not going to be the same for every company. I would love to say, well, just implement this one people initiative and that's it, you're set. Right? It varies tremendously. It's why a great place to start actually is just having a people strategy. And a people strategy is nothing fancier than taking your business strategy and saying, okay, this is our business strategy. Here's a few people things we need to do. And here's a few segments of our population we're going to particularly focus on. It's interesting. Organizations often think, we got to just spread that peanut butter really thin across our whole population. And many times by focusing on particular segments, you actually get to more, kind of felicitous and equitable outcomes for everybody by just starting to focus on a few places, right? And that could be a demographic, right? It could be a particular gender or ethnic group. It could be a career segment, right? It could be early in career people. It could be high-level leaders. It sort of doesn't matter. It could be a division. It could be a geography. There's no one right answer, but it's going through that process of picking where you're going to focus and the few things you're going to be great at for your people that honestly accomplishes more than trying to do everything with, to your point, limited resources.
That absolutely makes sense, because when you do less and to completion, because so many times what happens is, whether you are sitting from either from an inside perspective or from an outside perspective as a consultant, you see that there's so many initiatives that are taken and they're just kind of left as check marks that, oh, we did this, and it's not touching people. So doing less, as you mentioned, and focusing it and bringing it to completion with quality. And one of the things I've seen has been very effective is that transferring the ownership to people itself. What have you experienced around that?
Yeah, this is a fascinating one, that organizations, when there's oftentimes this artificial divide, right? There's sort of like people and there's work, right? And work, we control it and we manage it, right? We've got our hands on the steering wheel kind of tightly. And I share a story in the book of wanting to put the words command and control in a presentation, right? As something a company was moving away from. My colleague said, no, don't put it in there. No, that's so 1970s. Don't put those words in there. I'm like, no, we're putting it in there. So we put it in there. I won the argument. And the client pointed to those words on the page and said, command and control, that's our problem. That's what we keep doing, right? The thing that we thought was 40 or 50 years in the past, organizations are still doing it. And so the interesting thing is when we actually kind of open it up and we say that the way people operate, right, generally independently in the world is the right way of operating work, we get great results. I'll cite an example. Recently, I moderated a panel with the head of innovation for a large bank, and he'd had remarkable success they'd sort of defined an agenda of where they needed to get to from an innovation perspective for all of their back office functions, right? So not all the like clever, flashy stuff, but the things that happen in the background that really make the bank run. They defined this innovation agenda, and then they offered, kind of a set of courses and certifications for people to become better innovators, right? Through all kinds of different learning. And they had remarkable success. They had great uptake. People upskilled themselves. They started going on these real career journeys. And I thought it was a wonderful example of, kind of that people-led change. But what they did right was they provided the right North Star. They said, this is why it's relevant to your job to do this. And then they provided the right resources and then an ability to measure progress. And with those three elements in place, I mean, they've had fantastic results. And I just love it as an example because I've seen other companies try to do similar things, right? Where, we put all this learning out and no one used it. Well, you didn't have the way of measuring progress and you didn't have that North Star of why they should do it. And that, to me, you got to have all those things in place to have the real formula for success.
Mm-hmm. That's a really, really great story. It's, again, illustrates the point that invest in your people the right way. And you did talk about why it's being done. And that's what gets people, because especially, I know the golden age for job seekers is coming to an end. That said, in the past few years, people have been looking for meaning. People have been looking for creating impact and a sense of belonging. So when we talk about that, so many times what happens is that a lot of professionals end up leaving one company to another company and yet not finding the satisfaction they're looking for. So what could they do to understand work, even when sometimes it's painful? So for example, people may be getting, like, one of the recent stories I heard from one of my clients was getting verbal praise, and yet I'm not getting a title change, I'm not getting a promotion, I'm not getting the team transfer. So what does it tell me?
No, absolutely. And it's interesting that I think a good output of the last few years is we're starting to interrogate what you're referring to here, kind of those multiple layers of meaning at work, that you've got the high level purpose, right? What is the purpose of this company? What is the change we make in the world? And it can be, what's our purpose in the business ecosystem, right? It doesn't always have to be like a socially responsible purpose. And then kind of basic level, there's literally, what is the point of the work I do? Does the work I do have some sort of an output, right? Why am I doing the things I do all day? And then what you're alluding to is there's kind of this middle piece of, okay, the things I do have an impact on the company. Do they then have an impact on my career? How can I change? How can I progress? And it's interesting because we're seeing companies do a lot of rewiring to better enable those outputs, right? Because to your point, when we praise employees and we say they're doing great, and then we don't have concrete ways to elevate them, you create a say-do gap. I mean, I've seen this with organizations over and over where they have, let's say, fabulous leadership development. And they put people through these wonderful programs and people learn and they grow, and then they don't have a next job to put them into. And that's that moment that you're alluding to of kind of things fall flat. So I'm encouraged by how many companies now are looking at, it doesn't always sound as cool as leadership development, but career pathing, a lot of times for that employee, will make a big difference. And the interesting thing is that as much emphasis as there's been on compensation oftentimes isn't the answer. It's not always vertical growth either, right? These sort of traditional kind of money and power things, a lot of times it's lateral growth. It's, I want to expand my knowledge. I want to expand my skill set. I want to expand my responsibility rather than I need to move up the corporate ladder and make more money. And so companies that can accommodate both models I think really can retain the best talent.
Absolutely, because that has been one of the issues that employers have been facing for past few years. So when we talk about not only acquiring good talent, but also retaining the good talent, so many times what happens is that one of the other common issues that I've heard from my clients is that we had experience in X, Y, and Z tech tools. And now the company is bringing in the new tool, but they may not have the resources and time and investment to train everybody on the new tools. So, what happens is that the pace that people are being exposed to the change in technology is so rapid that, going back to what you mentioned, is that people are experiencing fatigue. How can that be balanced out?
Yeah, so there's a whole chapter in my book on this, because I think this is one of the seminal issues of the contemporary workplace that we don't talk enough about. There's some great data from, I believe it's from Gartner, about half the time when you implement a new technology, it's something like half your workers want the old tech back. To your point about change being introduced at a sort of faster pace than people can tackle, I think the other issues to be grappled with are, with cloud deployment, the underlying software is changing in real time. And with cyber protection, sometimes your user experience can feel very interrupted, right? I'm doing two-factor authentication every time I have to log in, right? Things like that, new updates downloading. And so we have this, and also, let's just be really honest here. Sometimes technology doesn't work. And sometimes the new system is worse than the old system, right? We got to just kind of say the quiet part out loud here. So put all of that together. And then to your point, the rapid rate of change of new technologies being introduced. And the tech experience at work is not a great one. I mean, I saw one survey where they believed that 18% of respondents had left their job to get access to a better tech experience, which is a crazy statistic. Nearly 1 in 5. I mean, that's wild to me. So what organizations can do, I think there's a few things. I think number one, talk about technology more openly, honestly, and candidly. And, say, okay, it's not always going to work. Here's what we do when it doesn't work. Here is the impact that cyber protections are going to have on your user experience. We live in a very cyber threat rich world, right? So here's why there are updates downloading every day, right? Just be honest about it. Have that communication around it. And also on team level, there are things that an individual or an individual leader can do. So I talk about in the book, if you don't want people to feel like technology is a thing being done to them, which I think is a really common feeling, volunteer your team to be beta testers, right? Get them involved in, okay, there's going to be a new technology. We'll test it. We'll give feedback, right? Create those loops. Don't make people feel like technology is just a thing that keeps coming in their face. Make them part of the conversation. And, the good news is pretty much everything I'm recommending is for free, right? It's just communicating differently. It's not buying fancier systems or improving user experience or, any of that stuff would be great. But honestly, we could get a big lift from just talking about it differently.
Yeah, no, definitely. These are very valid points, and you are hinting upon a lot of things that are not being talked about. So two aspects that I want to touch upon is one is from an employee perspective, because so many times you hear this like, oh, what is this organization going to do for my career? There is that shift in perspective, whereas before, people used to be like, yeah, I'm going to join this company, retire over here. So there have been a lot of different shifts. Like, of course, people feel that there's no loyalty from the company to them because they can be laid off anytime. And at the same token, the loyalty that people used to have is shifting that, okay, where's my career trajectory going to go? So now, given that, basically what we're observing is this arena where people feel like everybody's out for themselves, but that does not create a conducive atmosphere. So what can employees do? And what can employers or leaders do so that we can bridge this gap?
Yeah. I think you just described it beautifully. And it's interesting. In some of our Mercer research, what's really popped is this idea that we're renegotiating the lifestyle contract, right? That, to your point, it's a negotiation from both sides. And I think for employees, it's being vocal about what makes their life work, right? So not just, okay, I need more money, I need a bigger title or whatever, but what makes my brain grow? What flexibility do I need? And so I'll give a very concrete example. A lot of times in the flexibility discussions the last few years, it's all been about the where. I want to work from home, I want to work virtual, I want to move to Canada, whatever it is. But what people are actually seeking on the flexibility front oftentimes is the when. It's the, okay, my best work is not necessarily done 9 to 5 because of anything from my circadian rhythms to, my kid's school schedule. So reorienting the conversation around the lifestyle thing you genuinely want, which is the when flexibility instead of the where flexibility, is a great place to take it. And then from the employer's side, same thing, kind of reversed. Think about your employees in aggregate over kind of the totality of their lives, and how are you a better part of making their life work? When you come at the conversation that way around that lifestyle contract, that's I think when a bit of the magic happens. And to your point, you can reestablish some of the trust and some of the stickiness. If organizations can figure out this career pathing thing and be able to move people in interesting ways that keep them growing, right? You could reestablish the gold watch organizational tenure, as long as you keep providing experiences that really light people up. These don't have to be irreversible trends.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, so to speak, that it doesn't have to be in one way or anything. It can be negotiated. It can be talked out. It can be a compromise on both ends, because employees also understanding that if I'm getting X, Y, and Z, then I got to recognize that this is going to also happen, and I need to put in the work. I need to see what the growing pains are. It's not just all about me. It's about it. I always say, whether you're shaking hands or whether you're giving a hug to someone, whatever it is, it's a partnership. It's not a one-way street. So tell us a little bit about any thoughts you may have around this, and then tell us a bit more about your book.
Yeah, I think one of the key pieces, and you'll see this as sort of a red thread in a lot of the strategies in the book, is just opening up more dialogue. That organizations that really figure out clever ways to listen to their employees, but then to have the dialogue back, right? A lot of the sort of classic mistake is sort of do employee listening, right? So we've got our annual engagement survey and we have the data, and then we broadcast back, right? That's not a true dialogue. Creating a true dialogue is how you avoid these sort of ships in the night moments of, oh, we're losing people and we don't know why, and our tenure's going down, and et cetera, et cetera. And in the book, kind of the mission was, it's interesting. I started off, years ago thinking about this kind of fun, jokey book about like adventures in the future of work, and it's so silly, and open plan offices and agile sprints. And during the pandemic, kind of my mental vision really, really changed. And so the book is really about what are all the ways that work kind of breaks down. And that could be greedy work, where work takes over too much of your life. Or that could be the fact that fundamentally for different employee groups, people's basic experiences still really vary in the workforce, right? Depending on what demographic group you're in. And that's no good either. It could be, how do we incorporate foreign-born workers better into the workforce? Or how do we avoid animal farm syndrome, where you became the piggy boss you swore you'd never become, right? All those places that work breaks down. And then practically, what can we do to start to fix it? I mean, that is the number one client question I get. Okay, this is great. What's a first practical step I can take? And so that's what I try to really orient the book around. Number one, let's name the problems, and let's just get some practical places to start solving.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful. And I'm sure it's book that's going to help many. Where can people find it? And if they want to connect with you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so the book's available anywhere online that books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent booksellers, everywhere online. And then the best place to find me is generally on LinkedIn, although I am present on Twitter as well.
Fantastic. And your LinkedIn profile is?
It's LinkedIn, and then the handle is Swift Melissa. And my Twitter is @MeSwift.
Fantastic. So given that, what are 2 to 3 actionable items that you can leave our audience with that they can walk away and implement it today or tomorrow?
Yeah. So one great place to start is just talking with your team members, whether you're the leader of the team or not, just talking with your team members about how work gets done in your team and where it seems to work well and not. We don't always have this conversation about how things actually get done, but that's a great starting point. And then I'll come back to the do less one. Go down your own sort of mental list of priorities and figure out a few things you're not going to do. I think that's extremely powerful.
Absolutely. So that is definitely a given. And do less to completion. And so many times we all, and here's the thing, that don't keep it as a checkbox. Do it because it's going to move the needle for you. Do it because it's going to make a difference in your life. And I really like what you had mentioned earlier is about creating that lifestyle contract, whether it's with yourself, with your employer, or if you're a leader with your team or with your team members, vice versa, doesn't matter. It's about that partnership. And any last words before we wrap it up?
No, I would say just, don't be afraid to ask the provocative questions at work about work, right? About how work gets done.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Because if you don't ask questions, then you don't know what the answer could have been. So thank you for joining us, Melissa.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners and audience, for joining us, because without you, the show would not be possible. You are the show. And reach out to us. Let us know what issues you may be facing or what areas you want to grow. How can we support you? How can we help you live the lifestyle you want to live? So remember that we are here for you. And I really appreciate and want to thank each and every one of you who reaches out to me and shares your thoughts. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible. Folks, be well and take care until next time.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.